Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. We'll look at verse 6 in just a moment to start our lesson here. Good to see you here this morning. Appreciate your attendance. We have any visitors this morning, we do encourage you to come back at another opportunity, and we appreciate you being here so much today, and we hope that definitely we can see you again. If you've missed some of our lessons of late, we've been going through a series of lessons on unity, on the unity of the Lord's church, and when the Lord's people dwell together in unity, what a blessed and wonderful thing that is. I've had some talk to me and question about that. It's not suggesting that we have a lack of unity as to why we're doing these lessons, but we definitely could always be more unified and more together in our efforts. So it's more of a preventative measure than anything, more so than dealing with an issue that we have. I do think, especially at a larger congregation, it's something that we always probably need to work more at, to be more unified, to know what's going on in each other's lives more. And that takes some effort on our part. Sometimes we may have to strive to mingle more. We may have to try to get around and to see our brethren more, but that's something I know I need to work at, and I know we all do. It's hard to catch everyone sometimes while we're here, but we definitely need to make those efforts, and while we're here and while we're away from here, to stay unified in our efforts and always strive to live in peace with each other and as a body of God's people. So that's why we're doing these lessons on unity. And today we talk about a very important aspect of unity, and that is how we come across to others, how we communicate, the things that we say, the things that we don't say. And when we do talk, how we say that and when we say that. It means a lot. And this jar or bottle here of seasoned salt may not mean much to you. You may have used it. Probably most of you have seen it before. It'll definitely season whatever you're using it with. But I want to give you a little bit of history on where this product started. The beginning of the Lawry's seasoned salt starts back in 1938. Started in 1938 actually at the family restaurant named after them, the Lawry's Prime Rib Restaurant in Beverly Hills, California in 1938. They had some really good food. You can read kind of the history of that. But just your regular old run-of-the-mill salt they didn't believe was good enough. They wanted something to season that meat more. They wanted something to make people's meals better. So they put together their own brand of seasoned salt. They finally tweaked it to their likings, to their perfection. And they placed it on the tables in this restaurant, and everyone loved it. They loved it so much that they couldn't keep enough of it on the shelves. They couldn't keep enough of it on the tables. And in fact, a lot of people were stealing it while they were there eating in the restaurant. They would slip it in their purse or slide it in their pocket, and they'd take their own home because sometimes the shelves would run out of what they could sell. Everyone loved that seasoned salt when it first came out, and they just couldn't get enough of it. Now that's a true story, but what's the lesson in that for us? Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, are our words like that seasoned salt? Do people look forward to hearing what we have to say? Do they want to be engaged with us and hear us out? Will they keep coming back for more? Or on the other hand, are our words and the things that we say and how we say it and how we come across, is it something that people dread? Do people kind of try to avoid us? Does our words repel people and push people away? We have to ask ourselves that. Because if there's ever anything that will cause division in the Lord's church, it's a lack of clarity in what we're saying. Clear and proper communication goes a long way. What we say, how we say it, when we say it, makes all the difference in the world. The book of Job, in Job chapter 6 and in verse 25, says, how forceful are the right words. And that's very true. How forceful are the right words, but what does your arguing prove? I think we all have to ask ourselves that when we think about how we communicate with other people. Clear and proper communication in the Lord's church is vital to our unification and our unity and living in peace. And I want you to notice what it says there in Colossians 4 and in verse 6. It says there, let your speech always be with grace. And again, you can kind of see why we looked at this just a moment ago. Let your speech be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer one another. So we need to think about that, and we need to understand that. Sometimes when we speak, it's like this guy, he may have questions in his mind. Or on the other side, this woman may be interpreting what we've said with exclamation marks, and she may be taking it in a much bigger way than we meant it. And you can say, well, it's their fault, they just misunderstood me. Maybe there's some truth to that. But how we say it, when we say it, and what we say makes all the difference in the world. So if somebody's having trouble understanding what we're trying to get out, chances are there's some kind of problem with what we're communicating and how we're going about doing that. So I want to look at just a few things this morning that I believe will help us in that. Maybe some things, obviously, they're pretty well understood. Some things maybe you've not thought about quite as much before, but definitely something that we all need to work on and something that we need to strive for. Number one, anytime that we speak, we need to speak to build up. And I will say this, I love to talk. I know you're not surprised to hear me say that, but I love to talk, and a lot of you do as well. And to have just chit-chat or small talk or just talk about just whatever comes up, there's nothing wrong with that. We need that. We probably need more of that. We need that more time to fellowship and more time to talk. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of what I'm saying? We really have to think about, why am I saying what I'm saying, and what is the reason behind it? What's the motive behind it? What am I trying to accomplish? Even if we're just doing just regular, just common chit-chat, talking back and forth about whatever's going on in life, generally you have a purpose in that. And it may just be to see see how somebody's doing, to just kind of catch up a little bit, to spend time with them. But anytime that we talk, at some point it has to be mindful of the fact that there has to be a purpose behind that. Paul told the church at Ephesus in Ephesians 4 and verse 29 to let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth. Now, a lot of people interpret that to be cursing or swearing or saying something that is obviously not good, but that could mean just what you're saying, period, or how you're saying or how it's coming across. So he kind of clarifies that by saying, but rather what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. That's very, very important. And I know you've all heard the phrase before, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Well, not saying anything at all is really not good either, because that's not good communication. So we need to think about what we're saying and how we're saying it, and make sure that we're talking about the things that are good for necessary edification. And we're going to look at something at the end of the lesson that has helped me, and I will say I probably need to use it more, because I need to think more about what I'm saying before I say it. But again, we have to ask ourselves, am I really edifying others? Am I building others up? Or could it be how I'm saying what I'm saying is tearing other people down? And it might not even be a personal thing towards them. It just might be certain about things in life in general. But what's our purpose when we talk to other people? Think about that. I'll tell you a great problem that we have as far as speaking and building up. And that is, a lot of times we just have aimless, busy talk. Or maybe we're really involved in rumors and not a lot of facts. And that's a great danger. And I'll point this out. Over recent years, I say recent years, I would say at least over the last decade, maybe more, what kind of TV shows have really taken off? It's these reality shows. And you know why that works? You know why people tune into that? It's because it's full of drama. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but we love that as people. We get sucked into the drama in other people's lives. Maybe we look at their drama and say, "Well, I'm not that bad off." So maybe it's an ego booster. I don't know really what it is, but for whatever reason, we're drawn to that, and we get into the lives of other people, and it gives us something to talk about. It gives us something to discuss, and we've kind of always been like that. But sooner or later, again, we have to think about what we're saying, and is it really going to build up, or is it just aimless, busy talk? Rumors, I will say this, rumors are probably one of the most dangerous things to the Lord's church, because rumors sometimes have facts, but very seldom have things added to it, things taken away from it, things interjected into that. And it's amazing how quick those things can be escalated into something that really was not that big a deal after all. I want to give you an example. Do you know that Abraham Lincoln's body was moved 17 times after his death? You can look it up. 17 times. His casket was actually opened 5 times before his body finally reached its final resting place. 5 times. 3 was kind of understandable because it was having to do with his tomb and different things being constructed, and they had to place his body in something a little bit more suitable and a little bit better. But 2 times were over rumors. Think about this. The first time that his casket was actually opened was in 1887. A rumor started that his body was stolen and that casket was empty, and they had to open it to make sure that he was in there. There was no truth in that. It was just rumors and aimless gossiping that started that. In 1901, it happened again. 36 years after his death, the rumor got started again that his body had been stolen. And guess what? They had to open him up again and look, make sure he's still there. Isn't that pitiful? And here's the point I want to make from that. Rumors and false information won't even let dead people rest. And it definitely won't let living people. It gets us all worked up, it gets us anxious, and it causes feelings and emotions and a lack of unity that just doesn't have to be. And we have to be careful about that. Paul talks about that when he talks to young Timothy, because he knew he was going to have to deal with a lot of different people being a young preacher. And he said, in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 13, there are those who learn to be idle. They're not really doing anything. They don't really have a purpose. Remember that. They don't really have a purpose, but they just go about from house to house, idle talk, gossip, being busybodies, just saying things they shouldn't be saying. They don't really have a purpose. They're just talking. They're just running their mouth. And it's not helping anybody. In fact, it's hurting a lot. He says you don't need to be doing that. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 15, let none of you suffer as a murderer, thief, and evildoer. And notice what's in the context with that group. Or as a busybody in other people's matters. We need to speak to build up. And I ask you, what's the purpose of gossip? You ever thought about that? What's the purpose of gossip, or what's the purpose of talking about a rumor? Well, I heard the other day. You won't believe it. What is the purpose in that? Has it ever really been to help someone, or has it just been just to have something to talk about? Now, maybe people are helped at times from a little bit of talk about somebody here and there, but chances are it's just talk. You go on your way, you spread it to somebody else, and then you go to something else. Does that really build up? Especially if that's in the Lord's church. No, it does not. Have you ever done this before? You ever made a habit, or at least ever so often in your life, you stick your foot in your mouth? A lot of times, I think we're kind of a little bit of a misunderstanding of that. A lot of times we'll say, well, I shouldn't have said that. I really stuck my foot in my mouth. I would venture to say that sticking your foot in your mouth is probably what we need to do. We usually say that to describe what we have done, but if we would stick our foot in our mouth more often, and I can't get mine up there, maybe you can, I know Lizzie can, but if we could stick our foot in our mouth, we probably wouldn't say so many foolish things. But a lot of times that's what we end up doing, right? We allow some things to come into our mouth that shouldn't be there. And notice what Jesus said about that in Matthew chapter 12. That should be, it's a typo, chapter 30, or verse 36 and 37. He said, I say to you that for every idle word that men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. Notice that, idle word. Words without thought, words without purpose, words without any direction. They're just kind of idle, and they just kind of sit there and do whatever. We need to think about that, because idle talk, aimless, busybody talk, rumors, lacking facts and truth does not build up. Again, why are we saying what we're saying? Are we striving to build up, or could it be something else? It's a question we all need to ask ourselves, and something we probably need to be more careful about. Here's another side of this idea of good communication. And that is, again, we need to have a purpose. We need to have a goal. But that goal, and at least in part, needs to be that we need to be clear and open. And what I mean by that is, when you talk, we shouldn't talk in kind of cliches or hidden messages. Sometimes people say, well, they just kind of talk like in a word salad. In other words, we just kind of throw things out there. We don't let anybody in, so to speak, but we sure don't let much out. Have you ever talked to somebody before and you walk away thinking, well, I don't know where they're at. I asked them how they were. They said, yeah, okay, but I didn't feel like they were okay. I think a lot of times when we see somebody kind of extend themselves to us, and if we just don't want to talk about it, we just kind of dodge them. And we just kind of throw some cliche out there and we go on our way. Now, maybe there's a private issue in your life and nobody needs to know it. I understand that. But I do understand from this standpoint that in addition to many other things that we may have to talk about, there comes a time where we do need to talk to somebody. And talking in cliches and hidden messages and just kind of saying things in a way that maybe people kind of misinterpret and really don't let them know where you're at in life, that can be a problem too. And if I want to be clear and if I don't want to confuse people, I don't need to just kind of throw vague things out there. I need to be clear. And that's exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 5 and verse 37. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And if you're kind of doing anything in between or more or less, it's from the evil one. In other words, Jesus is saying you speak with clarity. You speak with clarity. You let people know the truth. You say it in the right way. A yes is a yes. A no is a no. It's nothing in between, more or less. How often do we communicate in that way? So many people in the world you can't trust. At a minimum, and we ought to at least be able to trust our brethren in the Lord's church. I will say this. Sometimes we need to set time or set aside time to talk with someone. There are things that just don't need to be said in public. There are some things that don't need to be said in a group of people, even if it's a small group. Sometimes it just needs to be one-on-one. It's amazing how people can misinterpret emotions or misinterpret a gesture of the face or a turn of the eye or anything when you're talking to a group of people. They may take it wrong, but a one-on-one session, expressing your heart, talking about what's on your mind, talking about what you're going through, that's a real good way to have clear communication and to hopefully maybe get the assistance and the help that we need. In Galatians chapter 6, I want to point out something to you that's always been very, very important to me as far as thinking about the Lord's church. Galatians 6, beginning in verse 1, it says, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. That really says nothing about talking, but I think it has to do with it. This is why. If I don't know your trespass, or I don't know your struggle, if I don't know your burden, or you don't know mine, or we don't know each other's, now again, everybody doesn't have to know it, but the point is, if you don't know what's going on with me, and I don't know what's going on with you, how can I help you, and how can you help me? You can't. I don't have ESP. I'm not a mind reader. I feel like sometimes I can kind of read people's emotions and pick up on maybe something's not right, but sometimes I'm clueless at that. Maybe you are too. We are members of the Lord's body. We are Christians. We are brothers and sisters in Christ. We are part of Christ. We are striving to get to heaven, and it is a battle to get there. And if you and I don't talk, if we don't communicate, if we don't text, if we don't do something, and when I say you and I mean all of us together. At least somebody that you can reach out to and trust. If we don't know each other, how can we help each other? If we don't talk, if we don't communicate, how can we be unified? And we definitely can't help with a burden if we don't know the burden exists. Maybe you don't want everybody to know your burden. Maybe you don't want everybody to know your sickness. That's fine. Some things are really private. Some things are embarrassing. That's okay. The whole church doesn't need to know it, but somebody does. Because if somebody doesn't know it, guess what? You're bearing it on your own, and you're not meant to do that. God didn't create us to bear our own burdens. Even Christ had to have help bearing His cross. So we need to talk more. We need to talk. We're in this, you heard me say it, we're in this together. And we need to start communicating like we are, if we're not. It's definitely an important part of our journey here in this life. It's okay to discuss our weaknesses. It's okay to say, hey, this is my sin, this is my fault. Yes, I'm not happy with it. I'm a little bit embarrassed about it. But guess what? Right beside of where it says talk about your weaknesses, to pray for each other. Because that prayer is effective, it's fervent, and it goes a long way into helping us to be better and to be more unified. I want to say this, and I hope you remember this. The church is the most powerful support group on the face of this earth. There's a lot of support groups you can be a part of. There's a lot of different things you can go to get encouragement in life. But the church is set up, and if it's working the way that it's supposed to, if we're unified, if we're all doing our part, and we're going to talk about later on what Paul talks about to the church at Corinth about the body may have many parts, but one purpose. We're going to talk about that as well. We're going to talk about all of us using our talents, and that's all of us. Okay? Very important. Another lesson for another day. But when we pray for each other and help each other, we're all the better for it. Again, it may not need to be an open church-wide thing. That's up to you. But somebody needs to be praying for you and with you if you're struggling. We need to think about that. And we need to do more than just think about it. I would say we probably need to do a much better job because the church is the most powerful support group on earth. So we need to learn to lean on our brethren. We're not meant to go through this life by ourselves. And we need to be quick to listen. I would say that I've probably not been the best at this in life because I'm usually talking, and there's a lot of times I just need to hush. And that's something I need to work on, and maybe you do too. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk and talk more. That's what this lesson's about. But clear communication also has to do with keeping your mouth shut. It probably has a lot to do with keeping your mouth shut. In fact, probably twice as much. Clear and proper communication more than likely has twice as much to do with listening than it does talking. In fact, I believe that's scriptural. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 15, Jesus said, "He who has an ear, let him hear." Well, guess what? We were given 2 ears and what? 1 mouth. You've heard this before. Which means, at the very bare minimum, we should probably listen twice as much as we talk. But I ask you, why is that important? Why is it important that we listen? Well, sometimes people need to be heard. That's why. Some people need somebody to lean on and to maybe vent or to maybe voice their concerns as to what's going on. And if we're always talking, we're probably not going to hear what they say. Proverbs 18 and in verse 2 says, "A fool has no delight in understanding." In other words, it is foolish to not even entertain the idea of listening. But notice what it says. But all he cares about is expressing his thought or his heart. Is it okay to express our heart? Sure. That's what we're talking about. But it's a foolish thing to not have any delight in understanding, or in other words, listening to somebody else. Do we need to communicate? Do we need to get our point across? Yes. Chances are we probably need to listen before we do that. How well are you doing at that? What about me? Proverbs 18 and in verse 13, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." I think sometimes we probably do that. We're very quick to jump to conclusions. We're very quick to have our own assumption, and we fire off an answer as to what we think about somebody or some situation, and we don't even have all the facts. There's a real powerful lesson in where Jesus says, if you have an issue with your brother, you leave the altar and you go talk to him. Because a lot of miscommunications and a lot of confusions can be cleared up if people will just look each other in the eye and just talk. Sometimes, I would say oftentimes, we're probably not that far apart. We just hadn't talked about it. So we need to be quick to listen and to hear the whole matter before we jump to conclusions. We need to definitely be slow to anger. Again, we've heard the phrase before, maybe we need to count to 10 before we say something. Well, we need to listen twice as much before we do, especially if we're frustrated about something. And again, probably the last one that needs to be preaching this, but we need to slow down before we talk and think about how we're going to say it and how we feel about it, because wrath or saying things in anger does not produce the righteousness of God. We need to be quick to listen. Are you a good listener? We all can talk, but are you a good listener? Listening is twice as important as talking when it comes to clear communication and unity in the Lord's church. We also need to understand that clear communication is essential. I think I've pretty much already established this, but again, look at what Proverbs 12 and verse 18 says. "There's one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health." If we think about what we're saying, it's a healthy thing. Physically and mentally, and most importantly, spiritually. Proverbs 13 and verse 3, "He who guards his mouth preserves his life, but somebody who just open wide their mouth causes destruction." So what we say, how we say it, and when we say it has everything to do with how healthy that we're going to be as people and as a unified group of God's people. Ephesians chapter 4, we need to put evil speaking away. Ephesians 4, 31 and 32. Let all the bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, evil speaking, do away with that. Learn to forgive one another. We'll talk about that in another lesson. But we need to get rid of that evil speaking. Again, if it doesn't edify, then don't say it. At the end of the day, that's what we have to understand. And we need to learn to just speak the truth. Speak the truth, even if it hurts, Ephesians 4 and verse 15, and say it in love. Again, how we say things, the manner of which we say it, and what our motive is, makes all the difference in the world. This is one of the best things that I've ever seen in helping Daniel think about what he's saying. And again, I need to carry it in my pocket and stick it on my forehead probably, but we need to think before we speak. Okay, think about that. Notice what that stands for. The T stands for true, H helpful, I inspiring, N necessary, and K kind. Is what I'm about to say true? Is what I'm about to say helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it does not pass that test, then just don't say it. It's that simple. This simple test simply will say you either say it or you don't say it. We need to learn to communicate clearly and to think before we speak. Now, having said that, I want to close with this. In John chapter 8, and in verse 6, or starting in John chapter 8 there in verse 1, but as you get down into verse 6 and 8, you see Jesus do one of the most peculiar things that you ever see Him do in the entirety of His life. Jesus has brought to Him, or it is brought to Jesus, a woman who supposedly has been caught in adultery. I do believe she was a sinful person because He tells her to go her way and sin no more. I've often had my doubts as to what she was actually caught in. I don't know. Here's my problem with this whole story. Not that the Bible's not true. Here's my problem with the Jews. They're saying this woman's caught in adultery and the law says that she should be stoned. That's only half of it. So should the man have been stoned. I've always questioned, where was he? He's never in this picture. So did they really catch her in the act? Are they going off just rumors? Are they going off just certain things that she's done in the past? What really is happening here? We're not told. But I do believe she is a sinner. And chances are she's probably not been faithful as she should be in those ways. But you see from the get-go there, you've got a mess. And you've got some bad communication. You've probably got some untruthfulness. And they throw it all at Jesus and they say, we caught her in the act. Now what do we need to do with her? The law says she should be stoned. What do you say, Jesus? And of all the things that Jesus could have done, of all the ways that He could have responded, what did He do? He stooped down and He wrote on the ground. Now, I've always kind of jokingly said, one day I hope I have the opportunity to ask Jesus, what did you write on the ground that day? I highly doubt I'll even care if we get to that point, but have you ever wondered what He wrote? It really doesn't matter, or the Bible would have told us. But He didn't say anything. He stooped down and He wrote on the ground. And after He did that, He got up and He said, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And then He knelt down again and He wrote on the ground again. What's the business with all this writing on the ground, I ask you? Have you ever really sat there and thought about that? I don't know for sure why He did. I have an idea this morning that I want to share with you. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not. But I do think it applies to what we're saying this morning. Why did Jesus write on the ground? I'll tell you this much. If Jesus had said, you know what, she's guilty. She is guilty and she needs to be stoned. Kill her. They could have said, well, the Roman law says that adultery is not that much of a sin and you're breaking Roman law, therefore you're in violation of the Roman law, and Jesus, you're guilty. And furthermore than that, you're not really a very merciful, loving person after all, like we've heard you are. He couldn't say stone her, even if she did deserve it. He could have said, well, she's not guilty. Then the Jews could have spun that around and they could have said, well, you're not even a person who cares about the law of God, because here's an adulterous lady and you're saying she should be let go. You're too easy on sin. You see, it didn't matter how he answered that, whether yes or no, they had him. It was a test. So what did he do? Well, I'll tell you what he did. He communicated clearly. And I believe in part, when he stooped down and he wrote on the ground, I believe he was giving himself time to think of exactly how he was going to answer these foolish people. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do at least think it's viable to our argument this morning. The argument that says we need to think before we speak. You just think about his emotions in that. Here's a woman that yes, she has some problems, but rather than trying to help her, they just want to stone her. And in fact, they want to try to trap him as they do that and maybe stone both of them. Jesus knew their hearts. I'm sure it aggravated him. What did he do? He didn't say anything at first. He stooped down and he wrote on the ground. Why did he write on the ground the second time? Well, after he come up and said what he did, I believe he gave them time to think about what their next response is going to be, in word and in deed. What was the result? John chapter 8 and in verse 9, from the oldest down to the least, they put down their stones and they left. Do you know what the result was? Jesus communicated clearly exactly what they needed to hear and exactly what this woman needed to hear. How does that happen? It happens by thinking about what you say before you say it. You see, communication, clear communication, has everything to do with unity, but it also has to do with how many souls are going to be saved and how many are going to be pushed even farther away. Jesus was the master at communication. Maybe we need to ride in the dirt a little bit more in life and think about what we're saying. Clear communication is vital to the unity of the Lord's church. Let's think about it, but let's apply that, and let's be good communicators. Let our speech be with grace, seasoned with salt. And we can definitely work on that, all of us, to strive to work as one unified body. Appreciate your attention this morning. I know that lesson was not really one of the invitational type, but as always, you may have said some things in your life. You may have communicated in such a way that's not pleasing to God. Maybe this morning you need prayers to be better at that and to have forgiveness for that and to improve going forward, and we'd be happy to pray for you. Maybe you need to communicate this morning in a way that you're just struggling and you need the prayers of the church, and we're definitely here to have a listening ear this morning and to help you. But this morning, if you're not a Christian and you're ready to become one, what a better time than to be baptized right now. If you're accepting the Lord's invitation, won't you come while we stand, while we sing?